It's the end of a semester and the end of an era for DukeWeek. Jake is graduating, and I'm moving on to other projects at the Chronicle, so this is our last episode as co-hosts. In commemoration of the occasion, I'll be talking to Jake about what he learned in his time at Duke. But first, staff reporter Audrey Wang is going to discuss new policies for getting into basketball games, which the headline monitors discussed at last week's Duke student government meeting. So tenting is returning next spring after a year off during the pandemic. What's the schedule for tenting next spring?
So the headline monitors are planning on following the 2019-2020 season schedule, which was a long season, meaning that it had the UNC game at the very end. So the current plan is to have the same 2 weeks for black tenting, 2 weeks for blue tenting, and 2.5 weeks for white/flex tenting, while the night hours remain the same. So that would be 1 to 7 a.m. Sunday through Thursday, and 2:30 to 7 a.m. on Friday and Saturday. So as for the dates, the 2 weeks of black tenting start on January 9th, 5 p.m. and on the 23rd at 5 p.m. And blue tenting starts right when black tenting ends, and the 2 weeks run until February 6th at 5 p.m., upon which white/flex tenting begins and runs until February 23rd at 5 p.m.
And although tenting is coming back, COVID has not gone away. So what happens if people in a tent test positive for COVID?
The two bottom lines for tenting COVID policies are these. So first, changing policies by Duke in response to the pandemic may necessitate policy changes. So the policies being announced right now might not be the policies implemented in the future just because of the state of the pandemic. Another point is that if tenters test positive for COVID-19, they need to let the line monitors know as soon as possible. So the head line monitors and the VPs of tenting have final discretion over how to handle each situation. So with that in mind, here's what was announced at the DSG meeting and in subsequent updates. So at any point in tenting, if 3 or more students have COVID at a time, the tent should email the headline monitors to discuss accommodations. As for blue and black tenting, if 1 or 2 students in a tent are positive at a time, the tent then needs to have that number, 1 or 2, fewer students required in the tent for night hours. So for example, a tent of 10 would only need 9 members at night during black tenting if 1 person has COVID. However, the same teams will then need to have that number of people during blue or white night hours for the same period of time that the tent received accommodations for as a sort of makeup. So if you have, say, 2 people in your tent during black tenting who tested positive, had to get accommodations, you would then have 2 more people during blue night hours to make up for it.
Changes to the walk-up line policy for games this year were also discussed. What are those changes?
In late September, the line monitors came in and presented their changes to the original walk-up line policies. The start time for registering at the walk-up line originally began at the end of the previous game, but this was changed to being at the discretion of the line monitors, and that time was communicated at least 24 hours before the start of registration. However, this new policy caused more problems than it intended to resolve because students still wanted to line up earlier than the start time, and the hold your own spot policy was frustrating for many students. So now the new policy is that students can register for the walk-up line starting 2 hours after the previous home game. And there will be scheduled registration times, but they can also find line monitors at Kville or email line monitors, even though it's not a guarantee that the line monitors will make it to Kville and register them. So yes.
My esteemed DukeWeek co-host, Jake Sheridan, is a Chronicle reporter and the former features editor. He's also written and edited for the Ninth Street Journal. His 8 semesters at Duke have spanned 4.5 academic years, as he took a gap semester in fall 2020. Before Jake graduates, he's going to talk to me about his time at Duke, student journalism, and his advice for his first-year self. Jake, welcome to a very special crossover episode of DukeWeek.
Thank you. So nice to be here at the same time as you.
So how does it feel? You're about to graduate after 8 semesters, 4.5 years, because you took a gap semester. Yeah, how does it feel?
It feels good. I'm so grateful for my time here. I love Duke so much. I love Durham so much. I'm from North Carolina, so I love North Carolina so much, and the Chronicle, of course. And so many of different things. It's just been so wonderful. But I'm ready to go. It's walk around campus, and there are not as many familiar faces as there were. I'm grateful, but I'm ready to go. So I feel good.
That makes sense. I'm still waiting to get to that point.
Yeah, you'll get there. You'll get there.
So it's been quite an eventful 4.5 years at Duke University and in the world. As you think back on your time at Duke, what are some of the big events that stand out to you, the big stories, and how has the university changed over that time?
Yeah, so I'll get to the changes last. When I was a freshman, activists stormed the stage while Vincent Price was speaking, and I think there was a Duke that, they thought needed to change, and in some ways has changed. We see things like housing reform and just kind of a greater culture around inclusion and diversity that's really good and powerful in some ways. At the same time, I also think that this university has become considerably more corporatized, if that makes sense. Man, I think that's something that sometimes is reflected in the institution, but also in the students sometimes, and the things we prioritize and the way we do our lives here. So one of those changes, like student activism on campus isn't really as much of a thing anymore. Even when I was a freshman, and maybe I'm reading too far into this, but even basketball games were like more of a thing when I was a freshman, I think. And so it's changing in a bunch of different ways, but I think one of them might be students work even harder and maybe do less things for themselves, which is a scary one. That's a really scary one, and I hope that's not the case.
With some of those things, like a tradition of activism maybe being a little bit lost, a tradition of being rowdy at basketball games, and students maybe prioritizing work more, do you think some of that's a byproduct of COVID, having this sort of weird break in students' college experiences, or do you think that's a broader shift?
Yeah, I think, this last year and a half has allowed us to kind of reevaluate what we care about, and also literally kept us away from each other and kind of blocked the transition of knowledge and tradition. I'm sure that some of the traditions that are particularly time consuming, like basketball, or that require getting together and doing things in person, like a lot of good student activism does, have just been made impossible by the pandemic. But also I think these are changes that were afoot my freshman year, my sophomore year, my junior year when I had a junior year. This is senior year too, so that was quite a while ago.
So your perspective, at least part of your perspective on this, on your whole time at Duke, has been as a student journalist. How has your work as a journalist, do you think, affected your perspective on life at Duke and life in Durham over the past few years?
I think it's really allowed me to think about and understand the institutions that shape student life. So, I've covered admin, I've covered faculty unions, adjunct unions, I've covered just about every animal there is to cover at Duke. I've written a ton about Durham, from restaurants to the mayor's race. I don't know. I think being a student journalist forces you into spaces and communities that make your life so rich, but also really give you a sense of what's going on. And I guess that's our job, is to figure out what's going on. I mean, it's really wonderful to get a fuller sense of the way everything works here at Duke, which is, such a productive place, I guess is one word.
That all sounds great. That sounds like my own experience. And I think that's proof that everyone who is listening to this podcast should join the Chronicle. I will say that you can write about animals all you want. You can't have the possum infestation beat. That one's mine.
Dang.
Which is an old joke that no one listening to this podcast will understand, unless you were here for the great possum in the fuse ceiling incident. So the last thing I wanted to ask is if you could go back in time and talk to college first year Jake and give one piece of advice about college, about life, about the next 4.5 years, what would that piece of advice be?
I'm leaving Duke, and I think I feel, this intense understanding right now of what I won't have that's here. there are dozens of classes and professors that I wish I had taken or spent time with. There are clubs I wish I would have joined. There are so many Chronicle articles that I didn't write. And you've heard about all of them, Matthew. But my advice would certainly be go hang out in the Duke Gardens. One, because the gardens are the best place ever. But two, because the richness of the Duke education emerges from a lot of different points, but it emerges most prominently from other students. And just hanging out with other students is the most important learning task that you could do. And there's no better place at Duke to do it in the gardens.
That's great advice. I'm a big Gardens fan, but I will still try to take your words to heart even more for my last semester.
I hope so.
Jake, it's been a pleasure to co-host this podcast with you. Good luck with everything you do in the future.
Thank you, Matthew. I'll see you soon.
In other news, students and faculty on Sunday protested recently announced changes to the Thompson Writing Program, which would shift the program away from a focus on writing in the disciplines and toward emphasizing rhetoric and composition. Critics say the change would replace unionized faculty. Duke women's basketball took down then number 9 Iowa, as well as Penn, to remain undefeated, while the men's team beat then top-ranked Gonzaga in a Thanksgiving break thriller, but dropped a game to Ohio State last week. That's all for this week, this semester, and my time as co-host. It's been an honor to bring you all the news here on Duke Week, and I hope your finals go well and that winter break is a chance to relax, recharge, and have some fun. Our music is Goji Berry Beat by Nana Qualbina. Thanks so much for listening.